Universal.
Okay.
University Tech.
Wow.
So.
All right. Well, I'm just going to go.
Go ahead.
All right.
Brandon Sanderson, everyone.
All right. Sorry, I had a typo on my thing. I was just up there eating lunch, but I had just finished, so timing is good. We are going to go into Professor Sanderson mode, which you've heard a lot from already this weekend, but this is real Professor Sanderson mode. This is writing professor. And so every year at JordanCon that I've been here, we have done a lecture on one topic. It's become a tradition when I come. And so we've already kind of covered the big three. We covered magic systems, we covered characters, we covered plotting. Today we're going to talk about viewpoint and tense. Woo-hoo! I actually really like viewpoint and tense. I think it's a very useful tool to learn as a writer. It may not be as sexy as magic systems, but it's very important to learn how to do some of these prose level things. In fact, I often say that if there are, I assume many of you are aspiring writers, some of you are probably just interested in the process. If there are aspiring writers here, particularly in fantasy and science fiction, the grand skill that will separate you when send that stack of when the editor gets that stack of submissions, the grand skill that will separate what they read and what they pass on has to do with viewpoint and tense. Because here's the thing, it's not very fair, but readers and editors and agents all will give you a very short amount of time to convince them, right? And this is pretty unfair, right? A lot of editors, they'll get this stack of submissions, and they'll start reading them, and they'll say, oh, rejection, after reading like one page. But at the same time, I will say, if you were listening to two pianists, and let's say one of them had been practicing for around a year, so it's not like they're complete novice, any other way around a piano, but the other one had been practicing for 20 years, and they both played the same piece for you, how quickly do you think you could tell which was 1 year and which was 20 years? I would guess that most of you, it's from the first notes you will be able to tell which is which. It'll come from the confidence, it'll come from the familiarity with the keyboard and just how it sounds very quickly. Well, that's what readers do more unconsciously and editors do consciously as they're reading the opening of a story. A lot of readers are a little more forgiving than editors are, but you do have to remember that editors in this business are just really, really, really excited fans who end up trying to do this for a job and being successful at it. That's what editors are in science fiction and fantasy in particular. Nobody works at Tor Books or Bain Books or anything like that because, they just wanted to, what's a great career that'll really earn me a lot of money and, I'm going to go be a science fiction editor? That's not how it goes. That's not how it happens. Everybody at these businesses are fans who were good readers, found they gave good feedback, found they had an eye for what people would enjoy, and then usually they apprenticed and became editors that way. And so, whether you're self-publishing or you're submitting to traditional publishing, you have a very short time to grab reader attention. Now, when I say grab reader attention, let me tell you a story. When I was in high school, I had a teacher. She was a very good teacher, by the way. But one of the things we talked about was the hook, right? That an essay should have a good hook to it. And so we were all working on our essays, and at the end, after weeks and weeks of working on these, we all got up to read our essays. And one person in my class took this very much to heart. He got up to read his essay, and he said, sex, 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 sex. And now that I have your attention, my essay on race relations in, whatever. Oh, that's my phone telling me to get ready to come to this.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. Right. That's how effective. Let me ask you that. What do you think of that hook? Any responses to that hook?
That'd be
Was that paraphrased or?
No, that's exactly what they said.
Exactly
verbatim.
Made us all laugh.
It made you laugh. So in some ways, it was kind of an effective.
But also, it rips you off because you were expecting a paper about.
But it rips you off. Yes. I think that too many writers, particularly newer writers, hear this. I need to have a hook, and they do a ripoff of the reader. Meaning, they start with like some really, really, really clever line, but they don't justify it. A really clever line is great if it is actually introducing your story and the way the story is going to be. What you need is a hook that accurately represents the type of story that you're going to write and accurately gives a promise of that story. Now, you can use a hook like Eye of the World, which is, look, there's going to be magic, there's going to be kingdoms that fall, all of this is going to happen, though we're going to start in a village. There's going to be all this stuff. So Robert Jordan uses the hook of an introductory scene that sets the tone for the series, and then says, yes, but now we're going to back up a little bit to this. But as I often mention people are like, oh, but then he took a long time to get to that. The mirror draw shows up in the third or fourth page of Eye of the World, the third or fourth page of the first chapter. He does not waste a lot of time getting to that. But he does use a hook with Loose Theron. That's an effective hook. That hook grabbed me. What would not have grabbed me is if I had had that hook and then the story had been a completely different story, right? I never got those promises fulfilled. I wasn't going to see people using magic. I wasn't going to see all of this. And so you need to be careful about what I say about grabbing the reader's attention. You want to do it effectively for the type of story you're telling. For instance, if you are writing a humorous story, having some humorous openings is good. But if your first few paragraphs are farcical just to get the reader's attention, but then you are no longer consistently humorous through the story, you're going to have a story that fails. All right? One of the best ways to grab people doesn't require you to set something on fire or to have explosions or things like this. Now, if those are appropriate for your story, go for it. Is to use a very well-done viewpoint from a character who is interesting. And if you do that and present the character being passionate about something in some way, angry, excited, whatever, if the character has this emotion and we connect with them in the first few paragraphs, you will have a very strong opening, even if it's not a story where things are exploding all the time. So let's talk about this. Viewpoint intents, these are tools. A lot of times people ask me, what should I use? Well, my answer as a teacher is never, you should use this one. It is, here are the different tools. Here are some of the effects they have. You can now decide which one's appropriate for your story. The viewpoints, you've probably heard these before. We're going to go into much more depth than you've probably heard before. Are, first, is that actually?
Yes. And also, you'll need to spin it 90 degrees if you want to write from that angle.
Yeah, I go like that. How do I write it?
Oh,
I go like this? Okay. First, second, and third. You've all heard those before, right? First, second, and third. So, someone give me a rundown. What's a first person, what's a second person, what's a third person? Go for it.
First person is your point of view.
Yeah, you use the pronoun I. Yep.
It's basically the point of view of me.
Yep. Let's say the character is going to JordanCon. How would you write that? I am going to JordanCon. All right, perfect. You are writing it. I was on my way to JordanCon. Or I am going to JordanCon. You write it in as I. All right. Second person. You. You are going to JordanCon. Have you ever read these stories in second person? Choose Your Own Adventure. They're all in second person. I mentioned Nora Jameson's book, The Fifth Season. She has some viewpoints in second person, and it works because it's like you get the sense when you start that the character is telling themselves a story that they've forgotten. It's like time traveling. You did this. Do you remember? Or they're talking to themselves. So you'll occasionally use second person even in your epic fantasies, where you're having the character address themselves and their thoughts. It's not going to be the main thing you should go for. In fact, second person is the artsy one. It's the really artsy one that generally you should avoid unless you know what you're doing, okay? I've seen some really, really good second person. The majority of second person I've seen reads like a choose your own adventure. And if you're writing one of those, that's great. But most of the time, that's not what you're writing. So second is the one that you generally avoid unless you're like writing the literary equivalent of my film school project. You know what I'm talking about. But there are uses for it. And then what is third? He, she, it, yes. You know, instead of, I was on my way to JordanCon, she was on her way to JordanCon, or something like this. All right, so the thing about this is what you were taught in high school. Well, there are lots of variations in these, and we're going to talk about why you would choose one versus the other. And I'm going to start splitting these down for you, because first person has a bunch of different varieties. One is what we call epistolary. And I don't know if I spelled that right. I've got Peter to take care of that if I don't. So epistolary. Epistolary. Has anyone read an epistolary book before? Yeah? Well, when did you read epistolary?
I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's been a while ago, but it's a setup. It'll be a series of letters. Right?
Yeah, everything's a series of letters, or more. We've expanded this to what we just call ephemera. But Dracula is the big famous one. You guys have read Dracula. It's journal entries and letters, right? But there was a modern one called Illuminae. Did anyone read Illuminae last year? It was actually, it sold really well in the YA field, and what it was a series is a bunch of texts and classified reports and things about these kids who got involved in something supernatural, and they're all redacted. It's like a big file that like the government had, and so it's really actually fun because they have a reason to do a YA book without swearing with kids that swear by blacking out all the curse words, because they did that. But they also like redact important things that you're like, wait, I want to know what was in that government person. And then there's like other things that are email conversations between the teens and stuff like this, and you get it all told to you through ephemera. So you see these sorts of things. One of my favorite epistolary stories is called Wiki History. You can Google that, it's online. It is a time travel forum, meaning it's the forum where time travelers post. And if anyone's ever hung out on forums like Dragonmount, you will find this hilarious, because the time travelers, and there's like one person keeps trying to move the thread on killing Hitler to the proper killing Hitler forum, and another guy's like, I killed Hitler again, and they're like, oh, looks like it's hilarious, but it's all done this. So first person does not have to just be epistolary, but famously, this is the way that you see a lot of the early first person, Dracula. Sorcery in Cecilia is another famous fantasy and science fiction example, but you tell the story through letters. The other firsts that we have are the present narrator. And this one blurs the line between some of the first and the third. This is the narrator is themselves kind of a character. I put The Hobbit in this. The Hobbit is Bilbo telling a story about himself when he was younger. Alcatraz, if you've read those. Our present narrator, first persons. Usually it is the person telling a story about themselves when they're younger, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's this storyteller. For instance, the Robin Hood with the foxes. You've got a first person present narrator, kind of the frame story, and the rest kind of plays out as third omniscient, but you've got that frame story of the first person. What is it? Utilali? Yeah, it's the bard. So you've got this. What happens in this is the first person character is a separate individual, at least in time, from the person you're telling the story about. Robin Hobb's books. You've read the Fitz and the Fool books. It's the same character, but years apart, writing about their youth. And what this does is you're you are characterizing two separate individuals, whether it's two different people or one person during two time periods. So that's a different thing from the other. And then you have kind of the first person immediate. Thank you. First person immediate is, this is going to feel like a fire hose. I'm sorry, guys. Usually in my class, I'm able to start the class with things that are a little less technical. You're just getting the technical stuff there. First person immediate, a lot of modern and contemporary YA is written in this. You don't get the sense that they are writing this down after the fact. It is narrated in first person, and it's like there's a chip in their brain, and it's just being transcribed to the book while it's happening. And it's like they pretend that you are just right there with them and able to experience as they are. It is the most immediate of these. I would say these kind of in descending order of immediacy, or ascending order of immediacy, where epistolary is like, oh, we found these relics. The next one is, oh, this person is telling us a story who has intimate knowledge of what's going on. And then the third, oh, we're right there when it's happening. Now, on third person, we have a bunch of different sorts of things as well. Because on third person, we have omniscient. We have limited. We'll talk about those, and then I'll see if I want it. So, omniscient is how things almost always used to be written. Anyone read any books in omniscient? What have you read in omniscient?
C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia.
Chronicles of Narnia, yeah. Chronicles of Narnia. What else? Dune. Dune is the big famous example that I like to bring up because it's kind of, he had a real mastery of omniscient. Sometimes when people write omniscient, it feels like they just kind of accidentally write omniscient because they're not sure what to write, or it was whatever. Herbert really got omniscient. So omniscient is where you are getting multiple viewpoints of characters in the same scene. And often it's by paragraph. You're describing what this person felt, and then what this person felt, and then what this person felt. It's kind of the storyteller style. Like you can kind of hybridize these if you have the present narrator. A lot of times the present narrator, who is not the same character, is telling a story about somebody that they are the omniscient one, the present narrator. And then the story's about all of these. So, Thomas the Tank Engine. Does anyone have kids? You have to watch this. Thomas the Tank Engine are an omniscient with a present first-person narrator. And what happens is, the Thomas the Tank Engine, it's a very easy one to go look up. Oh, Percy was feeling sad today. He wanted to pull his train. Thomas was feeling happy. He got to pull his train. You're getting everyone's emotions and viewpoints without any break in space or time to indicate it. You're just kind of throwing it all together and blending it all together. Okay? Do we got those all down? The last one I talked about in omniscient is really what it is. It's the hybrid, where it is what I just said. You use a first person and then a third person. Weirdly, Pat Rothfuss likes to use a third person limited frame story and a first person narrative in the center with a present narrator. He uses 3 of these in one book. I should explain limited then. Limited is kind of the gold standard of third person right now, as well as immediate is kind of the gold standard at first. Meaning, this is just kind of the default that you should generally assume you're going to write in. If you are not wanting to really worry about this. You're like, just tell me which one that I should be doing. You should be doing third person limited or first person immediate, but they each have different aspects to them, right? The reason I say that is, I would say 90% of science fiction and fantasy is in one of these two. And any of them that aren't are one of the other first persons. YA skews a lot more toward first person. Epic adult science fiction fantasy skews a lot more toward third person. And we'll talk about the reasons why. But limited is a challenge because you never show, you pick a viewpoint for a scene, and you don't show anything they don't know or can't see through the course of that scene, and then you can line break and choose a different viewpoint, or you can chapter break and choose a different viewpoint. Which of these is the Wheel of Time? Third person limited. I think that Robert Jordan has a lot to do with why it's become the gold standard. If you go back to the 80s, there was a lot more vagueness, like the original drafts of Ender's Game occasionally lapsed into omniscient. I think they actually changed that in some later editions and things like that. But you'd occasionally be like, and being felt like this. And now if you read along, having read a lot of strict third limited, you're like, wait a minute. Why are we in Bean's head for 2 sentences and then never again for 5 chapters? And then, by the way, Bean felt like this. Yeah, go ahead.
I just had a question about omniscient because
Yes.
I've heard differing answers on this.
Yeah.
You can say Percy felt like this, but you can't italicize what Percy's thinking.
You can. You
Okay.
can. Dune does this.
Okay.
So omniscient is a tricky one because if you're going to do omniscient, you kind of got to decide how you're going to do it. What you're talking about, well, even Thomas the Tank Engine has, I wonder what's happening, Percy thought. He does that. The Hobbit does this with Bilbo writing about himself in third person. The Hobbit's kind of weird in that way. But let's go look at Dune as kind of the great example of omniscient. We'll talk about omniscient for a while. It is really hard to do. And you almost have to come up with your own rules for what you're going to do in omniscient. We used Frank Herbert because he was very strict about it. He said, we will get everybody's viewpoints in everyone's scene, in any given scene. We will withhold no information from the reader. When the traitor walks on the stage, the guy that's going to betray the House of Trades, whatever, he thinks about, man, I'm going to go betray these people, right? He gives you the information all up front, and he creates dramatic tension through you worrying about the upcoming betrayal, rather than wondering who's going to betray whom, right? You don't have a secret spy in an omniscient novel of a strict omniscience. You can make the rules up yourself. You can be like, I jump between main characters, but I don't show non-main characters and things like that. J.K. Rowling sometimes does this. Sometimes she's like omniscient for only Ron and Harry and Hermione and things like this. You can come up with kind of how your rules are going to be, but you should try not to break the illusion for the reader, and consistency will usually be the way that you do that. With Frank Herbert, he showed everything. Anyone seen the David Lynch Dune? Have you seen that? Do you remember the voiceovers?
Oh, yeah.
That movie, if you haven't seen it, you look at somebody and you'll hear a voiceover of their thoughts. He did this because he wanted to replicate the third-person omniscient that was going on in Dune. And it's so weird on the screen. It's super weird. I actually have great fondness for that movie, and not just because it has Patrick Stewart with hair and Sting wearing spandex. Patrick Stewart with more hair. He doesn't have a lot, but more hair. It's a fun movie, and you can see David Lynch really trying to figure out how he's going to make this omniscient, weird, super epic work in a movie form. And he failed spectacularly, but it's still a good movie. So omniscient is the show everything, if you're being strictly omniscient. It is, you hold nothing back. Now, if you want to do this kind of omniscient hybrid, where you have a present narrator, that allows you to cheat a bunch, because what it allows you to do is to have this narrator, this storyteller. And the storyteller can be the bad guy or girl, right? And they can say, well, I could tell you this right now, but it's not the right time for you to know it yet. If you do things like that, you'll still annoy the reader, but you'll actually annoy them less than if you just don't show it, because it's doing what we call in writing hanging a lantern on it. It's, I am not showing you this because I'm mean, rather than because I forgot. And they'd rather you be mean than you have forgotten. Because if they think you've forgotten or that you're cheating, then they will start to lose faith in the writer, which will then kick them out of the story. However, if they just think you're mean, they're like, oh, those authors are mean. Things like that. But one thing I want to mention is he didn't know, but I will see a lot of people writing third-person limited, but they can't resist the urge to like end a chapter with, he didn't know it, but danger was lurking around the next corner. That breaks Viewpoint enormously. If you've been in a strict limited, it will actually boot the reader right on out. Even the ones who don't notice it will be like, that feels weird. It's something to avoid.
Why would you think she was like that?
What's that?
You know, like, why would she think she was skinnier? Why would she think she was, why would you think that she was skinnier than the norm?
Right.
Because,
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about what these do, and then we'll talk about how to write them, okay? Again, the idea is, and one of the things, a theme for my students that I talk about is learning to be a chef instead of a cook, which is an arbitrary distinction I make just to make a point. In my mind, according to this definition, the cook is the person who follows the recipe. They know how to follow the recipe pretty well, and they can produce, if they have the recipe, something that works. A chef is a person that knows what each ingredient in that recipe does, knows how they interact and why, and can tweak that recipe to produce different results, even with the same ingredients. These are your ingredients. If you, a cook could just say, okay, I'm just going to do what everyone else does. I'll follow it. I'll be okay. A chef says, well, what is the difference? Why would I want to choose one of these over the other? Let's go kind of generally. Why would you want to do a third person instead of a first person? Or vice versa? Yeah.
Generally speaking, it gives you more excuse to switch point of views.
Right, okay. So there you go.
There are some first-person books I have read that do switch point of views, but they're very few.
Yeah, I would put that as one of the main kind of advantages over here, particularly in third limited, is it handles lots of viewpoints. Third limited is really good with lots of viewpoints. Why is this? Anyone hazard a guess?
Tell the story more fully.
Okay, tell a story more fully.
If you're using first person, it can get confusing.
It gets pretty confusing if you're using first person for everybody because you don't have the repetition of the character's name on the page. And so there are plenty of really good first person books that use 2 or 3 viewpoints. But if you had, let's say, the cast of the Wheel of Time, and every one of them was a first-person viewpoint, you would pick up one of these books and start reading it, and it would be really hard, not really hard, you could do it, but it would be much harder to keep track of all of these eyes. Yeah.
Jason's Mystic, I just read it.
Yeah.
Just that, what, 2 first persons?
Two first persons. You can keep 2 first persons really well.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of great 2 and 3 first person, but more than that gets really challenging. So just as a simple mechanical thing, indeed, a limited, particularly limited, but also omniscient. If you're going to have a large cast of characters, a lot of times a limited, and particularly if you want to focus on a large cast, a limited is going to be your best bet. Any other advantages or disadvantages that you see that you didn't get from watching my writing lectures?
If you write in third person, you get very well acquainted with the narrator.
Yeah. I would say, particularly this one, really good for 1 character. Or 2, because you get to hear their voice, right? It lets you really well establish character voice and motivations. Particularly, the big thing in YA is the snarky viewpoint character, who's like kind of quiet, but in their head, they're the snark master, right? And this is kind of, it plays into, yes, I'm a shy high school student, but I'm also snarky like you. You see a lot of these, and it works very well. You can really dig into a character in first person very well. Other advantages or disadvantages that you see?
You can have an unreliable narrator in first a lot.
Yeah, first is way better for unreliable. Do you have an example of one? Alcatraz, very, very unreliable. King Killer, Quoth is unreliable narrator in his first person. Yeah, this is very classic example of something that you see in first person is the unreliable narrator. Well, yeah, getting great gap speed is another good example. In fact, I've seen like some first persons where it's kind of like the first person present narrator, and the narrator's doing it, where you'll cut to a scene of them looking at what they wrote. You don't know, and then they crumple it up and throw it away and then start again somehow differently. And you're like, oh, I can't trust this narrator. They just wrote the same scene twice and I saw the differences. Stuff like that you can do with first person really well. You can do an untrustworthy narrator in a third person. It's a lot harder. Matt Cawthon is a really good example. Matt is an untrustworthy viewpoint in that you always see his heart being in the right place, but the things he says and the things he speaks are often in contrast with that, right? So he is, the trick is you can see that tension between his thoughts and his actions, which is a special way of doing an untrustworthy narrator, but it's not as 100% untrustworthy, right? You know you can't trust what he's saying because you see his heart and know what's in it. With the first-person narrator, you never can quite tell, right? That's one of the big advantages. What else do you guys see here? Advantages, disadvantages. Yeah, we'll go right here.
In third person, you can kind of give more information as opposed to like what the in first person what the
Right. Both of these you can cheat a little bit. Your cheat for third person is you can be a little. Boy, you can't even read that, can you? Be a little more knowledgeable. That says knowledgeable. You can't read it. You can be a little more knowledgeable, meaning when you write your third person, you don't have to write it exactly as someone would speak. We accept that there's like this buffer, and that there's a lot of third person limited. Omniscient, it's more obvious, but even in limited, there's this sense that there is a narrator that's kind of smoothing out the thoughts, and only things that are directly in thought bubbles are in the character's voice 100%. Everything else is filtered with their voice and has a flavor of their voice, but, you know, writing a book from the viewpoint of my 6-year-old and trying to write it actually how they think would be so hard and really hard to read. But writing it in third limited, where you kind of get this sense that, okay, we're explaining how they see the world, and it lets us get cheat a little bit on information, where the first person from a 6-year-old, you can't do that, right? You can't say, he walked into the room and smelled something that reminded him of his mother. Oh, it was her lotion. No, you say, I walked into the room, where's my food? Oh, I left my food back there. I left the room. I came back with my food. What was I doing? Where's Daddy? Hey, I'm hungry. Oh, I have food. Like, that's how my 6-year-old would be. It would, if you want to be accurate, right? The third limited lets you smooth out a viewpoint a little bit and add some continuity between viewpoints where there's a bit of a consistent voice between the viewpoints. Now, one that people don't usually notice on the first person is your cheat here is info dumps. Right? Info dumps, the dreaded info dump. If you're not familiar with this phrase, it's particularly true in science fiction and fantasy. You need to get a lot of information across to your reader. It's a new world, usually. New characters, new laws of physics. Lots of stuff is going on. You need to convey this information to the reader in a way that is not mind-numbingly boring. Okay? Fantasy's gotten better and better and better at this as the fantasy genre has matured. You go back to the early ones, and it's like, I love Grandpa Tolkien, but Grandpa Tolkien's info dumps are like, all right, now we will explain this. And boom! And he's like, if you're lucky, he moves it to the appendix. But then you don't understand what's going on until you read the appendix. And then they transitioned into the long-winded prologue, where we explain all the gods of our world through a kind of thinly veiled story that, just trust me, it'll be fun once you get to the end. that happened for a while. It's the David Eddings prologue. I love David Eddings, but you know, these long-winded sort of, you know, here's the story before the story. This is good for you. Just read it. To the kind of modern info dump, which is something again like Dragon Mount, the prologue, which is you're thrown into it. You're thrown into character and conflict and passionate characters doing things, and you get fed information. Kind of like my wife feeds spinach to my children. Anyone do this? That she makes them a smoothie in the morning and puts some spinach in it to turn it green because they love the color green. Oh. They think it's just for food coloring, where really she's feeding them spinach, right? This is how you want to get your info dumps across. First person allows you to info dump in such charming ways because you can stick it in character viewpoint and make it all about the character where they're like, I hate going to the barber. I hate it. Not because I hate getting my haircut. I love having a new haircut. But everyone knows that when they cut your hair off, you can't use magic for a week, right? Right, like that sort of thing. And I can't go without my magic because then, you know, my lattes they get. Is a latte a cold one or a hot one? Mormon here, come on. Hot one. Hot one. Then my latte gets cold, right? Frappuccino's a cold one, right? Yeah, okay. Right? So, like, you can work in this world building and your info dumps by putting them in a really engaging and interesting first-person voice. And it does this whole spinach in the smoothie thing, where you're just enjoying what the person is rambling on about because they're a fun character. Whereas if you were in third-person limited, you're like, get to the point, I'm bored. The narrator's just blabbing at me, get back to the character. That's a big advantage of first person. Anything else you guys see here? Yeah.
One disadvantage with omniscience is that, like you said with Dune, you can't have a mystery.
Yeah, it's harder to have a mystery in omniscient. Definitely is. You get in a true omniscient, you have perfect info, which is an advantage and a disadvantage all wrapped up in one. It's one of the reasons why we don't see it as much. It's also really hard in omniscient to bond to characters because you're getting everybody's viewpoints at once. It's just kind of this economy of time spent. The first person, you're spending so much time with this person's voice and viewpoint that, wow, you know, you really get to know them. But at the same time, if you hate one of the viewpoints in a first-person book, it is death, right? If you dislike one of the viewpoints in a third limited, well, you're not getting their voice quite as strongly slapping you in the face. You can deal with it. All right, I'm really annoyed by X's viewpoints, but I know I'll have other viewpoints that I like, and I can get through these. It's just fine. But if it's a first person and that voice drives you up the wall, you're going to hate the book. Alcatraz is a great example of this. You can go read the reviews of Alcatraz sometime. Alcatraz is one of my most polarizing books because it's the 1 stars or the 5 stars, right? The 1 stars are like, this voice was so grating and so annoying that I just could not take this book. And the 5 stars are like, oh, I laughed all the time, just like me, right? That is an advantage and a disadvantage of a first person versus a third person omniscient. I'm sure everyone in this room has read books with large casts that some of the characters are just like, I do not like reading this viewpoint, but you probably still read them, and it didn't annoy you too much, like Catsway. Did that come out? Small little thing on this one. It's not as big a deal as people sometimes make of it. But first person, sometimes you do know the ending. Right? Meaning, you know, like, oftentimes, particularly the middle one, right? If the character is telling their story many years later, guess who lives to tell their story? And by the way, they were dead all along, first person surprise, that has been done. Doesn't mean you can't do it yourself, but there are a lot of books where it's like, surprise, I was a ghost all along telling you my story. Okay, well, you're the 5th ghost to tell me your stories. Ghosts like to write first person. That's part of the reason that epistolary and immediate kind of both, they don't have this disadvantage. Like immediate, you feel like you're right there with them, and so it doesn't matter as much. In epistolary, it's like, oh, we found this story by some person who encountered a great old one, and look, they're going insane as they write it. I bet they turned into a fish person and ran away, you know, to be with the other fish people or whatever. A lot of Lovecraft is technically epistolary. It's usually one big journal entry or something like this. And by the end, you realize the character went mad, ate somebody, ran off and joined the fish people, became a zombie living under the... Something like that. That's something like that happens to him. You don't want to be a Lovecraft story. Okay, so these are kind of your advantages and disadvantages of these different styles. It's a lot up there to do. And it gets really confusing when you see authors mix and matching these. Pat's the big one that has done it a lot recently, but what Robin Hobb does is really interesting in that most of what she is writing feels like first-person immediate, and then she breaks out to present narrator in their own sections, showing you him writing these things down. And those are really interesting because it's again, kind of like what Pat does, where it's mixing a third and a first in a lot of ways. So, yeah, mix and match. Any questions on this before I talk about how to do it? Yeah.
For an aspiring writer, would you recommend that they try all the different perspectives?
Yeah, I definitely would. I would recommend trying them. The only ones that I would not necessarily recommend, well, I'd recommend them all, but second person you don't really need to practice that much, usually. But trying an omniscient is really interesting. You just try it out and see, okay, this is what it is, this is what it's doing. Really becoming familiar with limited third person and your favorite of the first persons. I found the first persons transition really well. If you do one, it helps you practice the others pretty well. And you can jump around in those pretty easily, but yeah.
Is there a perspective that you haven't tried in any of your writing that you're thinking about doing?
I have done these all. My second person's all been just little silly things. I never published them. I wrote a second person story that I never published. Maybe someday I will, which is the story was written to a killer by an investigator, telling them what they did. You did this, you did this, you did this, sort of thing, which was it was kind of intended to be like not a choose your own adventure, but a choose your own ending, meaning you got to the end, and then there were like 5 different endings of who you thought the killer was and things like that. It's going to be fun. But that sort of thing you can do with second person. It gets really artsy-fartsy though, so watch out. Other questions on this before? Yeah?
So with the hybrid, would it be easier to couch first person in third if you're trying to make 2 viewpoints really stand out?
If you want 2 viewpoints to stand out, I have read books that one character's first and another character's third. I've totally read that. I've also read, if you've never read Name of the Wind and you're interested in this stuff, you can read Name of the Wind because it does third and then couches a first person in it. It's a really good example of playing with this. But I would also read, so I'd read Pat Rothfuss and I'd read Nora Jameson, The 100,000 Kingdoms. 100,000 Kingdoms is a really cool first person that does some really interesting things. Nora's really a master of viewpoint. That's one of her big things. The 5th season, which just came out, is even more artsy-fartsy than The 100,000 Kingdoms. I usually recommend 100,000 Kingdoms because it's more accessible. Has anyone read it? Yeah? A few of you. It's a good book. You guys really ought to read 100,000 Kingdoms. So, a slight content warning on that one, for those who are interested. There is a slight content warning on that. All right. Any other questions before we go on kind of how to do these?
As far as hybrids of third goes, Guy Garibaldi K does that quite a lot. It's in Under Heaven and River of Stars, and it got really confusing. Like, especially if you're not ready.
It can get very confusing if you mix and match these, unless you really. Guy really knows what he's doing, but he's very literary at times, particularly Under Heaven and its sequel. So yeah. I do like Guy's work a lot, but it can be a challenge to read.
Especially because it starts out, it seems very limited, and then all of a sudden, oh, and here's what everyone thought and what happened 1,000 years later.
Yep, yep. All right, so let's talk a little bit how to do these. I'm going to focus on first-person immediate and third-person limited, okay? Because those are the, kind of like I said, the standards of their separate genres. And I go until what time?
You can keep going all the way up to 2:30 if you want.
Okay, I have to stop a little bit before that because the signing, I'm worried that people have not gotten, who wanted to go, did anyone here want to go to the signing that they're like, didn't give you a ticket?
We're not doing the tickets.
You're not doing tickets? Okay, we'll try to start it a little bit early because I want to get through everybody.
Yeah, I have you set up over here so you can run signings as long as you want.
Okay, good, good. All right, so how to do this stuff. Remember how I said the grand skill I talked about earlier, that whole piano thing? So understanding this helps you start to approach being able to do this, because one of the things that editors look for consciously and a lot of readers look for unconsciously is mastery of viewpoint, right? When you pick up that book, you know whose viewpoint we're in, we know what they're passionate about, why they're distinctive, and we're interested in it. When you pick up a book and you don't get those things, the book has an uphill battle. Now, there are some books that don't do those things, and they don't do them intentionally, like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? It does start with some stuff, but mostly it's about tone and humor. And so it's perfectly all right that you don't have really a lot, but even in those, we get a lot of Arthur Dent's viewpoint and views on the world. They're just very dull compared to the world around him. That's the whole point. But most books that you're going to be writing, you want the reader to pick them up and immediately have a sense of those things. Who is doing the viewpoint, what they are passionate about, what's different about them, and you know what is happening exciting in their life right now. Kurt Vonnegut says, every story should start with somebody passionately wanting something, even if it's just a cup of water, right? Characters who want things are interesting to us. Characters having emotions are interesting to us. When we say start your story with conflict, that does not mean it has to be a sword fight. In fact, a sword fight is often a bad place to start a book. Even though it's exciting, you don't have the emotional investment in the character yet. And so if you don't take a little time to establish why we should care, unless you're very good at action scenes, which some people are, but unless you are, what you're going to have is a story that actually starts in a boring way because it's people you don't care about killing other people you don't care about. And you'd be surprised at how boring a scene like that can be compared to a scene about somebody who wants a cup of water for an interesting reason, very passionately. The character crawling through the desert looking for a cup of water in some ways can be way more interesting than the battlefield. So let's talk about limited first. It's the one I'm the most familiar with. So with limited, why this is such a great tool is you have this sort of lens. You have a lens through which you see the story. That lens is the character's personality. Okay? Now, in this, the character's personality is only a filter. It's like your Instagram filter, right? And the narrator, who is you, it has that smoothing effect upon the different viewpoints, and different chapters change lenses, which is why this whole thing works with limited. What you want to get really good at doing is making that lens distinctive, okay? If you can make the lens distinctive by asking yourself these things about character passions and whatnot, then you suddenly have a story. Go look at the Masters of Third Person Limited. Robert Jordan, this was his greatest skill, in my opinion, was his Third Limited. He was good at a lot of things. Third Limited was his true genius. When you think about how Matt Cawthon would look at the items on a desk and describe them, how Avienda would look at a desk and all the items on it and describe it, versus how Nynaeve would look at a desk and describe it, versus Rand. You could have just a table with normal things on it, and each of those four characters would write a paragraph of description which was different, right? Avienda notices my cup of water, you know? Matt is going to maybe have a look and see where the nearest escape route is instead of the table, right? Oh, the table was next to the door. Remember that, Matt, right? Rodney's like, look at that water. Nobody's paying any attention to that, right? So everyone in those books is going to be describing things in a different way. So you let that lens color your description, your action scenes, things like that. Go sometime, compile a list in the Wheel of Time of the way Matt describes characters that you've already had described in different ways. And how many of them look like, to him, like animals, or look like they could chew nails, or things like this. Clever phrases was Matt's bread and butter. Where Perrin will describe someone how?
Smell.
Smell. Perrin will describe smells instead, and motions and things. He'll notice the way their mouths twist, or the way that they look, and things like this. Perrin is very observant. He'll notice the little details that Matt doesn't. You'll laugh at Matt's. You'll know them better in a lot of ways when Perrin describes them. The descriptions matter a lot. And if you can start your story with this filter on, so that the reader reads it and says, wow, I know the character by the way they describe a cup of water, then you are doing it. That's the sort of thing, like the piano, that you can tell the master from the apprentice. That's the sort of thing. And this is one of the kind of grand secrets of writing that nobody tells you, except we all do, no one pays attention, I guess, is that ideas are cheap, right? You may have a good idea for a story. That's wonderful. Ideas are cheap. What is not cheap is the experience and practice to be able to describe a cup of water in a way that is fascinating. That takes practice, that takes mastery of viewpoint, and things like this. And that is why you don't usually need to worry about sending your manuscript to New York. I usually get the question of, what if they steal my story? What if they steal my idea? Which is, I worried about it when I was a new writer too. But as soon as you know anything about the business, you'll realize the cheapest person they could ever get to write that story is you. If they hire someone else to write that story, then they have to pay them way more. And they aren't looking for your story, they're looking for you, right? They're looking for somebody who says, here is my manuscript. From page 1, you can see I am a master of these things. Now, as the book progresses, you have to prove you're a master of all the other stuff. But no matter how good you are at plot, if you aren't good at this on page 1, you're usually not going to get readers getting past page 1. And that's kind of the secret of this all, is you and your skill is what's important and what people will be paying attention to. So, viewpoint, that lens. Go read your favorite authors. See how they are using the filter for the different viewpoints. And if you want practice, come up with a scenario. I often say to my students something like, all right, I want you to kind of come up with a town, like a medieval town, and then I want you to have 4 very different classes of people ride through the town and give a strict description of it, and I want every line of description to be different, to be colored by the way they see the world. Have a historian ride through town. Have, a thief ride through town. Have an outsider from another culture ride through town. Do these things until you get very comfortable with, this is the same scene 5 times, written through very different viewpoints, and your descriptions of what's in the town and the events that they see are all distinctive to the character. Practice that sort of thing, and then you can start to ease into writing your own story, where you let these things, these viewpoints give us our description. Really masterful writing is writing where the lines accomplish more than one goal. Now, it's really hard to do this all the time. Oftentimes, you'll be like, I just need this line to get this information across, and I will just do it. But the more that you can make one line evoke character, plot, and setting all at once, you are accomplishing something great. And the more often you can do that, the more you want to. It condenses your story. It makes it just more impactful, if I can use that kind of marketing speak word. All right, let's talk a little bit about first person, and then we will do questions, and then we will be done. So first person. First person is, as I said, really great for expressing a personality from line 1 because of the I feature of this. With first person, however, you want to go more than a filter. Third person is a filter over one person's voice that is going to be writing a bunch of different scenes. First person, it's no longer the filter, it's like completely different cameras or something like this. You want to have that first person singing off the page if you can. And if you are not able to write it in such a way that your first persons are all so distinctive from each other that you want to be able to take paragraphs and splice them together and have readers be able to circle and say, oh, this is this character, this is this character, this is this character. You don't need to be able to do that as much in limited. You want the descriptions to, every once in a while, the character to poke out. Don't let a paragraph go by without having the character poke out of one of the sentences. In first person, you want every sentence to be laced with their voice. As I said, this is dangerous. This can be very dangerous, but it also can be really, really fun. So the way you get better at this is you go listen. You go take some notes on the way people are talking, and dialogue is a completely different discussion. I did, you can watch the writing lecture on it when I put it up this summer that I did it in my class. You don't necessarily want to learn to replicate dialogue exactly. Most of the time, that's not what you want to do. But you do want to look for themes. You want to be able to say, oh, these people talk like this. And it's not just a matter of accent, and it's not just the simple matter of big words versus little words. Look for themes in the way they talk. Are they very aggressive in their speech or not? Some first-person viewpoints are kind of belligerent, where other ones are kind of flirtatious with everything, or things like this. You want to have some tones for each of those first person and be able to evoke that tone for that character from line 1. Is this a playful character? Is this a sarcastic character? Is this a belligerent character? Is it a belligerently sarcastic character? Is this character like a stand-up comedian, or is this character like the peanut gallery that's heckling the comedian? Who is this character, and why do people want to read more and more about them? I love little linguistic quirks. This is why the Reckoners use bad metaphors as a quirk for David. But you can have the characters' personality traits come out very easily through their first person this way. Ask yourself what they're distinctive and what they're passionate about, and let your descriptions go that way. For instance, David describes things a lot of times like guns, right? Someone doesn't sprint from a room, they shoot from the room, right? We use gun metaphors because he's a gun nut and things like this. Try to really hit your first persons hard in that way. All right, questions? Yes?
I know one of the more interesting characters I read in Outlaw of Law was Wayne.
Yes.
Was this just your opportunity to go ahead and work some of this, your ideas, your passion about it into one of your stories?
Well, Wayne was just, the different voices and things he does. Wayne is kind of based off the idea that every writer has a bunch of voices. They wear a lot of hats. Robert Jordan, Harriet tells a story, you can get her to tell it sometime, that like Robert Jordan would sometimes come slinking into the house, and she's like, oh, you've been reading Pat and Fane, have you? He's like, yes, I have. Or been writing Pat and Fane. He would get into that. Writers, we put on those hats. So, yeah, Wayne's directly connected to that. Any other questions? I hit you with a fire hose. You can watch a version of this lecture. It's not always the same. I kind of off the cuff them. I don't have like notes. When I post them on my website, you are welcome, Steve, to post this one as well. He always does every year, so you can watch it over again. Oh, did you have? Syl, hey, what's your question?
I was just wondering, you mentioned unreliable narrators. Are there different types, like classifications of?
Yeah, there are different types of unreliable narrator. One is like Matt, who is unreliable, not intentionally. He thinks he's always being honest. but he doesn't see the world the same way everyone else does. There's the Quoth, unreliable narrator. Quoth from Name of the Wind is unreliable in that he will make something more dramatic because he wants to tell a better story and make himself look better. But he's really not trying to lie to you. He just wants the story to be cooler, right? And him to be cooler. And then there's the, I am going to intentionally deceive you in order to keep information from you and keep you thinking a different way. That's protagonist as villain in some ways. I would say those are each different. You could probably come up with different categories of unreliable.
What is Alcatraz?
Alcatraz is a lot like Quoth. He is trying to make the stories the best he can while making himself look both awesome and bad at the same time. He's got kind of some weird motives there. Yes?
In the Reckoners, you have a great sense of point of view in dialogue with banter.
Right.
Like with Megan and David, and then David and the peasant.
Right.
How, are you using the filters?
I'm using the filters, but I'm pushing them more toward the first person. It's like, if I were going to write in this book in first person, how would it be? And try to get a voice for each character, and then use it only in dialogue and thoughts is what I try to do there. But that kind of gets into really how to write dialogue, which there is a separate lecture on that I do. So that, if you watch my website, we recorded those, and they have much better audio than the last ones I did. We'll be putting those on my website. They're not up now. We're editing them. They'll go up like in June. Yeah. The old ones are on YouTube, but I don't know if I did a distinctive. My dialogue lecture's gotten a lot better over the years, so you should watch the new dialogue lecture. Oh, thanks. Thanks. All right, last question, and then we'll go to the. Oh, you have one too, so we'll do two last ones. Yeah.
Maybe a little off topic. You started with the book.
Yes.
I just want to observe that sometimes I read a book that has the opening couple of pages is just so bad.
Yeah.
That it's a relief.
Yeah.
To get into something good at it.
Right, right. The opening chapters are too bad. Having been a writing professor for 10 years and reading a lot of people's writing, what happens in those is they're trying too hard.
Yeah.
They're trying so hard to have a hook or to have like beautiful language that it's purple. Or the other big problem people do is they don't start their story in the right place. They write their way into the story for a couple of pages, and then when they're familiar and comfortable with the characters, it starts getting good. And usually, like, I often cut chapter 1. Chapter 1's the #1 cut thing that I do in books, is because that's when you're still exploring it. And if you need what's in chapter 1, you cut it and then write it again, having finished the book, you'll find that it's way better.
Do you think anybody ever does that intentionally? Because sometimes the rest of the book is just so
I don't think
good.
they do a bad opening chapter intentionally. I'm sure there's somebody who has, but I don't know, someone has taken it upon themselves as a challenge to write a really bad opener, but I don't think they do it intentionally. All right, we're going to go ahead and go to the sign. You can ask questions when you come through the signing line, okay, guys? Thank you guys very much. Good luck.
We were in the line before. Over. Yeah. Stay there.